So today we're going to be looking at Great Zimbabwe. We're going to be looking at its culture, some part of its impact, and we're going to be looking at Mapungubwe as well. Both of these sites are in the domain of the South African Peninsula. When I refer to South Africa, I'm not exactly referring to the country. I'm referring to Namibia, South Africa, Lesotho, Zimbabwe, and all those other countries that make up the South African Peninsula. So first of all, I'm going to ask, if I mention Great Zimbabwe to any of you in the street, or Mapungubwe, or any of the great civilizations of Africa, what would be your response, Henry?
It's going to be limited knowledge, I have to admit.
Share with us all, please.
Well, I think the only knowledge I tend to have rattling around in my brain is, David Livingstone, etc., and that's it. So a colonial finder of Africa.
And obviously there was nobody in Africa before they got there, was there?
Oh, absolutely, it was empty.
Absolutely. Do you know what all I learned about Africa when I was a child, when I was about 8 or 9 or thereabouts, was those films that used to be on BBC Two after 6 o'clock, Tarzan and the Apes. And it used to be filmed in the 1930s, and you always used to see these people who used to go around shrinking heads, putting people in pots, speaking languages, banging drums, and there would be occasional elephant graveyards and weird remains. And that's what I can remember when I was a child. But my mind and understanding of the peninsula of South Africa has extremely changed, thankfully, since then. So again, same question to you, Pat. What do you think of when you think about the South African peninsula?
Pat's done a runner.
Pat has obviously done a runner. And Anne's mic is whatever. Do you know, on these lectures, it's good to have Del with us. So the image
not
there,
with us.
What's that?
He's not with us.
I know. That's because he's away today. So anyway, Great Zimbabwe itself is a city that is part of a number of towns and cities in modern day Zimbabwe that illustrate a very rich, diverse culture that the Shona people created that would have moved from the south all the way into the landscape of Zimbabwe, then into the north. And the Great Zimbabwe people creating this wonderful site and the walls in that single illustration there would have originated from the site on the left. The site on the left is a site known as Mapungubwe. Mapungubwe is in northern South Africa. South Africa, as we refer to it as a country. And obviously other remains on the right associated with the great peoples from across this landscape. One of the things to also say is that we've got a great diverse knowledge today. We've had a great diverse knowledge of these peoples for many years, but much of what we were told about these peoples was biased, hidden in colonialism, and didn't really paint the true picture. When I first came across Great Zimbabwe, it was actually in a history lesson. It was in a strange history lesson. We were talking about the scramble for Africa in 1878. And the scramble for Africa was when the British, the French, and the Germans scrambled to grab little states out of the African landmass after the Portuguese and the Italians and the Spanish had already grabbed their little bit, and obviously involving the Belgians as well. And one of the things that a history teacher said was that Cecil Rhodes, in the latter part of the 1800s, established a mining company, and this would mine gold and diamonds and various other bits and pieces from the Great Zimbabwean landscape. And I think he referred to some kind of stone-built city, and that's all I knew. And that's where the information resided for a very long time. So my mind is very biased. Then, also alongside that, we hear about ancient Egypt. So ancient Egypt didn't ever feel as if it was in Africa. So in other words, the picture that was being painted to us in the West through many circles was actually nothing much really happened in Africa until it was colonized in 1878. But then I go to university, and it's Leicester University, and names are thrown at us of various different archaeologists. And one of the names thrown at us of various different archaeologists was Gertrude Cato Thompson, a British archaeologist that was joined by various other female archaeologists who started excavating in Zimbabwe, funnily enough, at the site of Great Zimbabwe. And Gertrude was one of the first archaeologists to actually turn around to say, I'm an archaeologist from the West, but the archaeology that we're working on is not Western. The archaeology that we're working on is native built. And because she's female, it was basically dismissed what she was saying. Great Zimbabwe, even in the 1930s, 1940s, all the way into the early 1990s, was thought to have been believed to have been constructed by, under the influence or by the Portuguese, for example. And even in the 1970s, South African archaeologists who stood up to the establishment and said, no, Mapungubwe, Great Zimbabwe, and all the buildings that we're actually seeing were actually created by native peoples. And there was this one archaeologist, he published a paper, and he never worked in South African archaeology again because he was actually standing up to the establishment. And even in the 1980s, school children in South Africa were being told that people only ever lived in primitive roundhouses in Africa, throughout the whole of Africa, until 1878. And all those assumptions are really wrong. Now, I've given you various lectures recently, and one of the lectures I've given you is about the Amazon, and one of the other lectures is about the archaeology of Petra and the Nabateans, and now this one today, and countless other lectures. But those three lectures have something in common, and strangely enough, they've been back to back. Petra, the archaeology of the Amazon, and this one. And I come up with the equation 1 minus 2 equals 1. And that's a really interesting equation. And why is it an interesting equation? Because when we look at the Nabateans, we see that the Nabateans were in fact the Bedouins. They created a prime civilization, one of the great civilizations of the past. And then the Bedouins, after hundreds of years, decided from being Nabateans, they decided to go back to their Bedouin way of life. So civilization 1, civilization 2, civilization 1 again. And all civilizations and all ways of people living. And also we saw the same when we looked at those of the Amazon basin. And we saw that we had people living as they do today, native peoples living as they do today. 1,000 years ago, they were living that way. 900 years ago, they decided to build cities, wonderful cities that we're only actually starting to find today. But they decided to go to civilization number 1 again. There's nothing wrong with going to civilization number 1. And when we think about the people of throughout the whole of Africa, they've got a very diverse, advanced culture, very diverse understanding. But it's only now that we're actually starting to access the greatness of the African world. We're not talking about ancient Egypt here. We're talking about the people of Benin that actually had a great kingdom up until the Western world decided to eradicate Benin culture in the 1800s. We look at the kingdom of Aksum, more towards Egypt in northeastern Africa, a wonderful kingdom. and the remnants of that kingdom are to be seen within the landscape of Ethiopia today. We look at the states of Mali, but we also look at many other worlds that are still to be discovered. So everything I was taught at school was a lie. And very much my eyes started to open. I started to see the biased nature, the way we in the West feel that the history of Africa needs to be seen. But the history of Africa needs to be seen in the way it was actually seen. People that are as diverse as those in the West and elsewhere on this planet. This planet itself, at Mapungubwe itself, we'll tell you all about these different peoples and cultures. The people of Mapungubwe created their world in South Africa, the country, between around 800 to around 1250 years AD. Then they simply abandoned the city. Then they moved to Great Zimbabwe. Great Zimbabwe was already being founded by about 1100 years AD. And Great Zimbabwe was abandoned by 1450, only for the people to move up north. And then somebody said to me, that's madness. Remember, I've given this lecture 4 times this week. Actually 5, and this is the 6th time. Somebody said that's absolute madness. That's absolute nonsense. How can a people just lift up and go somewhere else? They obviously all died from disease. And I said, actually, the archaeology tells us that that's not the case. Then I said, look at what I was saying with the Amazon basin. I said about the Amazon basin, the peoples themselves just lifting up and creating a new city somewhere else. And they said, oh, well, that's America. That can't happen elsewhere. And I said, okay, then. Look at what happened a few years ago. They decided to move the capital city of Brazil into the inner territory of Brazil. They decided, right, we're not going to have the capital city at Sao Paulo, Rio de Janeiro. We're going to create a new city at Brasilia. All the administration is actually going to go there. But that is exactly what we're saying in the Amazon. Same thing happening today as happened in the Amazon hundreds of years ago. The same thing happening in Africa as well. People on the move because of trading links, because of changes in the weather and all these different things. The archaeological excavations at Mapungubwe in the 1930s, 1937 by Wade and Foch, as they were excavating, they started to find let's talk about it, pre-conquest evidence, pre-1878 evidence. But again, they had to keep quiet what they were finding because it's quite simple. If you deny the existence of a culture, you've then got a right to move into the land of this culture that you deny and establish your own type of culture. So in other words, by the Portuguese saying that nobody of civilization lived in Mozambique, we've got a right to Mozambique. We've got a right to educate the savages. That's what they were saying. But in fact, that's a very, very wrong assumption. We have got no right to do any of this at all. We've got no right to be the superior beings anywhere. And in fact, this isn't rewriting history. This is seeing history for what it actually was. And I'll just chuck this in here, which I missed earlier on. There was a time in the 1800s that buildings associated with previous civilizations were actively being ripped down by the British governors of South Africa and Zimbabwe. You know, wonderful structures that were really special were just being ripped down, or structures that were being ripped down to create farmsteads for the Boer and elsewise. And this is the way we've treated the assumption that we have a predominance to these countries. But these little plans about Mapungubwe show evidence, layers and layers of evidence. Stone circles associated with homes, potsherds, various other bits and pieces. And what I would like to do is show you where we are. We'll go back to that image. So there's Great Zimbabwe. So let's get the annotation bar in there. Move that up there. There she is. And there is where Mapungubwe is. And you can see that the earlier Mapungubwe is south of Great Zimbabwe. And then the peoples move then further north. Great Zimbabwe itself is around 200 miles away from the coast. It's inland, but it was a very, very great city at one stage. But simply they upped and left. In many ways, we judge these cultures, and we've got no right to judge them. We're stupid enough to build cities alongside the River Tiber, Rome. We're stupid enough to build London alongside the River Thames. All it needs to take is a small rise in water level, and cities like Paris will be flooded out forever. And these people in the past knew that. Great Zimbabwe was built not alongside a major river tributary, was actually raised across a big plateau above the zone of the tsetse fly. So they were aware that diseases were caused by the tsetse fly. So they had their great culture above, and trade worked for hundreds of years. They were a very successful people, and they moved their success elsewhere. That's what successful businessmen do. A successful businessman would see the success in his business, hand over that business to somebody else as the business is just about to go down the pan, and then create a new business, and then get that working, and then hand it to somebody else. That's the way you do things. And when you look at Great Zimbabwe, these great walls were simply just abandoned to another way, to another place, and to another location. Now, these wonderful objects will be very familiar to Anne's daughter, Mary. And I know she actually studied these. These are actually associated with the site of Mapungubwe. And that animal up there, I'm told, is a gnu, which is a wildebeest. And that there is a rhinoceros, and that's associated with some kind of scepter. That there is actually a crocodile, and that there is a golden bowl with holes in it. And why the holes? Well, all of these were actually mounted on a wooden carving, and they actually got golden nuggets, hammered them, stretched, and then flattened these out, and then stretched these on these objects, and hammered these sheets in place with copper nails or golden nails. I'd never heard of golden nails before. Look at this. Isn't that absolutely spectacular? Now, there are other such sites like Great Zimbabwe, all built by the native peoples of the land, the Shona people, the Bantu people, speaking people of the landscape. And these walls themselves, they don't look it, but these walls are in excess of 12 meters in height, taller than the Broch of Mousa on the island of Shetland. These walls are not, there's no battering to them, there's no diagonal slope. These walls themselves are actually vertical walls, and with very interesting entranceways, which we'll look onto. Somebody said, well, what are all these other remains? Well, these are actually little great enclosures where the vulgaris and common people lived. These people had a different type of civilization than the people that they were before and the people that they were later, because it was the way they did things. You know, you can't blame Shaka Zulu, and you can't blame the Zulu that then thankfully wiped out the British army at Islandawara in 1879. You can't blame them for living in huts and corrals and all the rest of it. That's the way they wanted to live. They had a sense of high culture. They had herding, they had cattle, they had trade and all the rest of it. Back in the 1870s, but we denied them a right to have their own country. And I've always said it's a shame that the Zulu didn't go on to wipe out the British Army at Rorke's Drift, and history would have been very different. But when you look at this again, you look at a people that saw the use of stone as being paramount to their society, when the use of stone has got a slight different meaning in today's modern age. And somebody said, "Can you turn your sound up a little, please?" Now, can I ask you, am I sounding loud and clear, Henry?
Yep, you're okay. A bit tinny at times, but no, you're coming through okay.
What I'm going to do, I'm going to make a technical change to the arrangement, and you tell me if things are changed. Is that changed?
Yeah, I think you're okay.
Does that sound clearer?
Yep, it's a bit sharper.
Oh, well, that's what I need. Sharper. And Anne, does that sound sharper? Put a message on the screen, please.
Yep.
And whilst you're putting the message on the screen, oh, yes, it does. That's all you needed to say. So, I don't know what it was. So what I'd like to do is move on to the next slide. And we looked at this on Monday. I didn't like this reconstruction because it's for me a little bit patronizing, really, but and it doesn't really show the picture. But the one thing it does state is that this is a dry stone wall structure. These walls themselves, even shown in the illustration, show a complete vertical wall. That tower itself is slightly different. There's a little bit of battering to it. It sort of inverts inwards with a flat top. Some have actually shown it with a conical on the top. Now, interestingly enough, that tower itself is solid. It's a solid stone tower. So how do you get to the top? Well, why do you need to get to the top? If I think like a Western archaeologist, I'm never going to be able to explain this. And then somebody said, what is the point in just a stone tower? And I said, okay, then you tell me the point in the Eiffel Tower. You tell me the point in the New York State Building. Oh yeah, it's this and that. And I said, tell you what, we would say the same about this if we knew what it was for. And then somebody said, what if it's a burial chamber? If it's a burial chamber, why don't they demolish the thing to find the body? And I'm thinking, have you got a right to actually even breathe out those words? And I said, well, if you look at this as a burial tower, for example, you could look at it as the pyramids at Giza. You could think, well, people weren't meant to enter the pyramids at Giza to find the bodies. So, you know, this is the same. And the tomb at Palenque of Pakal, that was never meant to be found either. Or is it just a tower? Why do we need a reason for everything? And you know what? I don't know if everyone went along with what I was saying about Easter Island. Probably most of you didn't. It didn't sound logical. And what I said is that lots of statues on Easter Island were just carved, and that was it. That was the reason for doing it. And then I watched a video by an archaeologist from the University College London. And her statement was that she believed that lots of the statues were carved at Easter Island for the sake of carving them. Because when you look at the ones in the quarry, they look like as if they were never meant to come out, which is a very good point. And then somebody said something similar. They said, oh, did you hear about that archaeologist the other day that he was saying that these sites were being created, and not these sites in particular, but some monuments in the past are being created. And then the point of creating them was the reason, and then they would go on to something else. And the point of humanity is just to keep changing and evolving and creating things and then going on to something else. And when you think about this, this is more practical, but you can actually see the mindset. When it's done and dusted, when you've used it for 100, 200 years, you just leave it. And why not? What right have we got to undermine their belief structure? And the other thing as well is one of the things leading to some of the things I'm actually saying is actually you've got the construction in this wall, but why put this decoration on there? Why put the decoration on there? And what is this wall about? And it's not about defense, which is a very interesting point. Is it to show off? Well, if it's to show off, you don't need defense, because if you've got the people to build this in the first place, there are no wars because they're free to build these things. Do you see the things we're trying to get at? All of these are logical expressions and logical directions of understanding these sites. So you've got these stone walls, some stone bases to these structures, and simple roundhouses. But then again, they're not simply roundhouses. They're part of this advanced culture that's given us this wonderful evidence today. Now, in all the lectures, I've actually stopped at this one. And I'm going to do the same thing. But somebody said, well, why have you got these entranceways? Where's the lintel? Draw me in a lintel, Carl. So, all right, then, let's just chuck a lintel in there. Oh, now that's better. Looks much better. And then I say, well, actually, that's not the way it was meant to be. They said, what do you mean? Of course there was a lintel on it. I say, actually, no. The same thing archaeologists used to think in the late 1800s, before they even excavated here. They used to think, whilst they were reconstructing these sites, they actually put lintels on the entranceways. And local people were going, why? Oh, yeah, because there would be a lintel on there, wouldn't there? There'd be a door here. And local people would say, no. Yeah, but there would be. So we're sticking a lintel on there. And the local people would be saying, all right, fair enough, just get on with it. But there were never any lintels on these at all. In other words, the lintel is a Western idea. Okay? You know, when I've looked at prehistory in Britain, I've said, well, the linear line is an innovation dividing a room. Whether it's a Roman innovation or a native innovation, I don't care. It's a division in a room. But that's an evolution, to divide a room into 2 bits. Roundhouse, 2 bits. And then you got stairs being added. Roundhouses don't need stairs. But if you need to get to the first floor, because you've got a multi-story building, you've got to add stairs. So that's an innovation. These people didn't need lintels. It's the same approach. So what we're going to do now, we're going to do a new screen share. And I am going to, the one image is going to blow your mind. Well, it blew my mind. And actually today we had a nice little discussion in Llantwit Major that sort of went the way I wanted it to. So what are you seeing on your screen now in a couple of seconds? Is anyone still there?
Yeah, we got a writer on the edge.
She is known as Tish Farrell. Right. What I'm going to do, we're going to scroll down this article and see what amazes me. Just go with it. Abandoned Great Zimbabwe. Top of the wall. You seeing the top of the wall?
Yep.
Like it? I'm going to keep going.
Right.
Tower on the left.
Yeah.
Wall on the right. Keep going. Keep going. You're going to keep going. Now there's that lady. Your reaction, please.
We haven't got to the lady yet. We're just getting there. Well, what is impressive is the stonework.
Yeah, it's dry stone. No
I mean,
mortar.
one is the sheer scale and the effort that must have gone into constructing it.
and it's 100% vertical. Now, to create the vertical line, this wall inside the Great Enclosure is taller than the Great Wall of China, right? It's also twice the height of what Hadrian's Wall would have been. This is all made of dry stone, and the tower on the right there batters inward slightly, and you can't actually see the battering. And there are no answers why this was constructed the way it was. You don't really need to construct this. It would be quite shaded. It would be quite an interesting, an amazing accomplishment. But the very issue that no dry stone was used, and the other issue that it's still standing today, tells you of the greatness of this civilization. The descendants are still there today.
Well, they must have had an extensive understanding of mathematics
Yes.
to actually have worked out how to actually keep it,
Yes.
one, upright, and two, to build it in such a fashion.
Yes, a massive understanding. And the one thing that this has in common with Hadrian's Wall is that the stones are virtually the same size of the stones used in Hadrian's Wall. But Hadrian's Wall mortar, this doesn't use mortar. It's not defensive. Actually, it's absolutely pointless defensive, right? And the reason why it's pointless having it defensive is that you can't defend the top of it, because a ladder itself, 12, 13, 14, 15 meters in height, is a bloody tall ladder. You don't get ladders, it's very difficult to get a ladder today that height. To have you'd need really long bits of wood, and you're thinking, well, so the word defense isn't in it. Being that this site's really being described by the likes of Gertrude Cato Thompson in the 1920s, she's describing it using a female mind, and females think away from the phallus. Men think about defense and war and sex, and women think about the sense that there's a lot more to history than those things. And when we think about this, the idea that this is not a defensive wall is coming from back then, and I will go along with that as well.
Well, could it be said that this has been constructed more to make a statement in the environment than actually as a defensive feature?
And also the word statement, with the availability of people, meaning that you can't build this if you're at war all the time. So what we're talking about is where that woman is standing. She's standing in between. She's standing in between there.
Right.
So this is, you can see the batter is coming in there, but there's no battering on the wall. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to read out the rest of I'm going to continue to read out the rest of the article. And I'm just going to make sure that's okay. So we'll keep that one there. And I've got the article on my other computer, so I'm just going to get that up. Waiting for it to load. Are you still with us, Pat? I don't think she is.
I can see her head moving.
All right, then, fair enough. Maybe she's a mammakin dummy.
Yeah, I'm here. I had a coughing fit and had to leave. Came back.
All right, no, at least you put the mic off.
I did.
We love you, Pat, but we don't want to hear you suffer. Anne would love to hear you suffer, but that's the type of person she is. So here we go. No one knows exactly why this great African city was abandoned. For some 350 years, until around 1450 AD, Great Zimbabwe had been a flourishing merchant center that drew in from the surrounding country supplies of gold, copper, ivory, animal skins, and cotton. The city's entrepreneurs then traded these goods onto Swahili states in the north on the East African coast, where modern day, Mozambique is. In return, the traders brought back luxury goods, jewelry, decorative pieces, such as China, all the way from China itself, and Persian ceramics. So there's a great trade going on, but none of these traders would have actually gone to the city. They would have taken them to ports and harbors along the coast, and this would have then made it inland. The city's ruins at Great Zimbabwe are over 80 hectares in area, 200 acres in area. Its many stone enclosures commanding the southern slopes of Zimbabwe's high plateau watershed between the Zambezi and the Limpopo rivers. This is what creates modern day Zimbabwe's borders, the Zimbabwe and the Limpopo rivers. The site is well watered with good grazing throughout the year. However, these people are aware of the tsetse fly. It may sound derogatory, but these people knew where to build, and that they knew if they could get away from the tsetse fly, they could have a city that would be free of these horrible bugs that would cause a deadly sleeping sickness to both cattle and humans. It's a granite landscape with plenty of building material to be used in the construction of these walls. The Great Zimbabwe was not a singular phenomenon. There are numbers of Great Zimbabwe's around, but this is the greatest. This basically means house of the stone. Contemporary with it and across the high plateau region, there are at least 100 of these types of sites, but not on this scale. Otherwise known as Ma Zimbabwe's, houses of stone. Several were large enough to be seen as capitals, a great state with various links between them. Now the sadness is how this landscape was being seen. And the sadness is that if only there wasn't apartheid, if only there wasn't colonialism, these people would have a lot more pride for their past. During Zimbabwe's colonial times until independence, the Rhodesian government actively suppressed evidence that Great Zimbabwe was built by the very people that are around when and just before independence was created. These same people wandering the streets actually created these towns and cities, but they were being denied their past. Many of the other stone ruins were destroyed or repurposed by European settlers. So the archaeology is being actively destroyed, being eradicated. So these people don't have a history. Without a history, you've got no identity, you've got no roots. The official view, and many official views were, but one official view wasn't that these were created by the native peoples. One official view was that this was a city of the Phoenicians. Now, the Phoenicians were a great trading people in the Mediterranean 3,000 years ago, but these cities were created 1,000 years ago. So the Phoenicians would have had to have come through time across a continent and a half to have created this, leaving no evidence that they had been there in the first place. Another was this was the city of the Queen of Sheba. But again, that's going back to the films of Tarzan and the Apes. Archaeologists, however, have long demonstrated that it was the cattle-owning Shona people who built Great Zimbabwe. And it was going all the way back to the 1100s. Thereafter, the city's rising fortunes and success of various buildings made this an important locality, a vital locality in the trade and understanding of this whole area of South Africa. Gold being a key commodity, but so were the cattle themselves. What they would do, they would trade their cattle for the gold, and then this would go to the site and then would be traded to the coast for other goods. The more prosperous the city became, the more sophisticated its demonstrations of prestige. We've got a little bit of a reconstruction coming up. it doesn't look like the other reconstruction. This has got a rounded top, and there's all little bits and pieces. Lots of reconstructions of these buildings and how they were meant to be seen. The buildings that we see today were mainly constructed by around 1350, with the vertical walls and these types of conical towers. And there is no indication that the walls were defensive. No indication. This was a regime of confidence, a regime of great power, and a regime of great authority. Now, this is crutch to where we are. If I move that down, there are various explanations. The people had let their herds overgraze the land. Maybe they had to move elsewhere because their herds couldn't graze anymore. Or was it because the trees had been cut down? Well, there's lots of trees there today. And I know full well that large tracts of the economy are still dependent upon the cattle herds. And if this was the case in the past, that the herds couldn't graze the land, they would be unlikely to be grazing it today, when in fact they are. There was a prolonged period of drought in South Africa. One of the key reasons why the Zulu went to war against the British, one of many reasons, was that there was some kind of drought going on at the time. They were victorious against the British Army, but the Zulus continued. So it can't be because of a drought. But somehow none of these theories quite explain why, after 350 years, this flourishing city, a community of 20,000 people perhaps, simply packed up and left. Did all these farmers, herders, miners, craftspeople, soldiers, traders, accountants, court personnel, city rulers, and so on, all decide to disappear in a day? The city didn't just die out slowly. The archaeological evidence needs to be constantly interpreted to really understand what's going on. Some people say, however, that towards the north, the Portuguese were interfering with the trade links in the early 1400s. And the people trading with the Portuguese and the various invasions, there was a different need for different products, gold, slaves, ivory, and so on. So what's seen is that the people of Great Zimbabwe just simply moved north to meet the trade, creating something known as the Matapa state that lasted well into around 1700. And what you see is people moving from the south further up north, and it's all to do with trade and various other things, some of the reasons we've mentioned. And the sense of having a civilization based on a plateau also altered. And even though it was advantageous for them to be away from these great rivers, the Zambezi, for example, it was far better for them. It was far better for them to readjust to the changes of the time. And what we do see is that the states within the landscape remained very wealthy, way into the period when the Portuguese were snatching big tracts of territory. And they kept trading and things kept going on. It's obviously that horrible period in the 1800s that changes everything. So again, this entranceway, very without the lintel and any of those other things that go bump in the night. What I would like to do is, if I keep that image up there a minute. And so into history, Great Zimbabwe goes. It first started to make it into history in about between the 1450s and the 1500s, when a legendary figure called Peter John is said to have created and built Great Zimbabwe. Great Zimbabwe by the 1500s was abandoned. and nobody was around to claim that they had actually constructed it. And it said that it was actually created by the Portuguese because there was no other explanation. And that was a view still held in the 1970s. But what could be understood is this new Matapa state that was now having intercourse with the Portuguese towards the north, above Zimbabwe. And the Portuguese had actually described that where the king lives was a big place. The houses are of stone and clay and very large and on one level. Within the kingdom, there are many, many very large towns and many other villages. They could have actually been describing the landscape of Great Zimbabwe, but in fact, they were describing the Matapa state. And that's where the great Zimbabweans actually migrated to. So what we have a glimpse of what Great Zimbabwe was like, but by looking at the Matapa state, which was created by the great Zimbabweans after they had abandoned the city. This was a sort of bit of a glimpse, but then history changes. Any idea that these people could have created Great Zimbabwe changed in 1878. Centuries-old heritage of royal courts is not a picture that Cecil Rose painted in the 1890s, or even the later Rhodesian government of Ian Smith. They did not want anyone to see the true truth of Great Zimbabwe and Mapungubwe and the Matapa people. And so in the end, this is not so much a story of a city abandoned by its people, but a people willfully excluded from their past by other people. In 1870, when Zimbabwe became an independent state, some of its past was reclaimed. The new state took its name from the first great Shona city and adopted for its flag and coat of arms an image of one of the city's ceremonial soapstone birds that had been found in the excavations at Great Zimbabwe back in the 1920s. These are small steps, but there is still a long way to go before the world sees the indigenous histories of Africa continent in their true perspective and acknowledges their intrinsic cultural worth. And after the break, we'll show you a little bit of a map. So what I'd like to do now, I would like to have a new share here, and then we'll ask for some questions. Are you seeing the two bits of the entranceway into the site?
Yes.
Good. An aerial view of Great Zimbabwe, doesn't that look at? That looks quite spectacular, but you can see all the other walls and everything around it. This is a very rich landscape. And I don't know if I've already given you this analogy. It would have been the 6th time that I've done it, but if I already have, stop me. When you think about these sites, you might be able to think of a Western analogy. On the eastern coast of England, in Norfolk, you've got the Saxon shore forts. And archaeologists still can't work out, well, I can, and I'm sure you guys can work it out as well, why, when the Saxon shore forts were abandoned, nobody moved into them and used them. They just left them abandoned. And when you go to these forts now, you can still see the walls standing up really high. And the answer is quite clear. Why not? Why do we always need an answer to try and understand the past? You know, it's said that the people, some of the new people moving in from the continent, or some of the people that had already been there, looked at these Roman forts and said, we don't want to live there anymore. And maybe in lots of ways, the people said this about Great Zimbabwe. We don't want to live here anymore. We want to go elsewhere. And that's exactly what they did. There's no mass burial grounds. There's no pandemic. There's no plague or anything. It's just a building abandoned. It's just buildings abandoned. It's a civilization abandoned because they all decided to move. They decided to move because they were rich. Do you know what? You know, I often get people in my past, they've said, oh, you know, I want to move from so-and-so, but I haven't got the money to move. You know, I want to move to Scotland, but I haven't got the money to move, right? If you've got a lot of money, you can go wherever you like. You can abandon everything and just go there. And again, this image, I've got there's also, if you gently look there, you've got a vertical tower and you've got this conical shaped tower. So they could build vertical towers, and this wonderful wall, absolutely amazing, 12, 13, 14, 15 meters high. And somebody asked me on once, they said, how tall is that? And I said, it's taller than your house. It was one of my youngsters, it was. He said, oh, and I said, it's much taller than your house. He said, oh, it's absolutely amazing. And what we're going to do, we're going to show you this quickly, and we're going to go back to the other image, and then we'll take a break. So Great Zimbabwe is there. There's Mapungubwe, the Matupa state further up north. You've got the Limpopo River down in the south. Here you've got the Zambezi River in the north. That's Zimbabwe. And, you know, it's a civilization based on other values other than just water. And what we'll do, we'll look at that there. That is the wonderful artwork that we see at Great Zimbabwe itself. They didn't need to create this, but they did. And they were able to create it. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to ask, are there any questions from you, Henry?
Yeah, just that quick one. I think you kind of answered it. Was I was curious to know whether there were any burial sites or on this particular location.
There is at Mapungubwe. We've got lots of gold evidence associated with it. But if you think about the ground, it's not really good for preserving bodies. Going back to Islandawana, when they've gone back to exhume the bodies from Islandawana, there's very little left of the bodies. There are thousands of them there because of the conditions of the soil. And,
right.
And that's only going back to, that's not even 200 years ago, 160 years ago. So it's not that long ago, actually. So the human remains have not survived. So any questions you'd like to ask Pat?
Is that granite? The stone? What is it made of?
Yes, it's granite.
And how did they cut it in those nice little squares and rectangles?
Bill, well, they're obviously cutting that out in blocks and dressing it. And as Bill would say, they would need to have iron chisels, and they did. The other site, Mapungubwe, is made out of sandstone, but there's lots of granite around here to actually make this out of. Granite you could see being used extensively in Cornwall as well. So, you know, it's not unfamiliar for people to use.
Yeah.
I just think, I just noticed something there. If you look at that stone there, it's fitted in nicely because they cut a little bit out.
Mm-hmm.
So all right then. What we're going to do, we're going to allow Anne on. We're going to stop the screen sharing. Add Anne on the screen.
Mm-hmm.
Anything you'd like to say, Anne?
Am I?
Yeah.
Do we know, what do we know about the Shona people? Do we know a lot more than you're letting on? You know.
Well, we know the Shona
hierarchies and things. Did they have kings or?
Yeah. Well, it's that sort of lineage assumed tradition that the Shona people actually tell us today. And obviously, we've got a leader that's responsible within this locality, like we have at Mapungubwe. But the leadership role is a bit loose in essence that there doesn't seem to be any conflict indicated. And when you get big leaders, you get a lot of internal conflict, and you're not really seeing this on this level.
Mm. Mm.
Right, so if there's no more questions, I'm going to take a break. I will be back in 15.
Okay.
And I've got to run a bath for my witch.
Right. See you in a bit.
See you in a bit.
Okay.
No making any duck noises, Anne.
All right.
I think it would be a fair statement to say that many of the artifacts from these sites has basically been asset stripped to a significant level.
Yes.
Is there any idea where a lot of this, the artifacts have ended up, or has it just disappeared into private collections and melted down, or?
When you think about the Benin bronzes, for example, lots of them have ended up in major establishments in the West. And then the interesting thing in regards to Mapungubwe and Great Zimbabwe is that their colonial power, in a way, South Africa was a colonial power in its own right, because it claimed Namibia at one point. And in that, lots of the artifacts did actually stay within the South Africa area. And naturally, as South Africa was part of the British Empire, lots of those artifacts did end up in museums in Britain and Australia and Canada and places like that. The other point to be made about this is that you're talking about the word assets stripped. We don't really know what Cecil Rhodes Mining Company actually did come across. So if they're coming across bits of gold, they're going to be smashing them up into lumps and then having them melted down. So we're not going to know anything about that. So we don't really have a picture. It's certainly, by the time the likes of Cato Thompson excavating at Great Zimbabwe and the other archaeologists are excavating Mapungubwe, which we're going to look at, much of the true surface wealth is gone. And I'm sure that if Cecil Rhodes would have been aware that on the plateau at Mapungubwe it was actually steaming with gold, it would have all been completely stripped, and the burials that we find gold associated with, all that would have been stripped as well. So it's sort of not having a real understanding of what's being lost, and we'll never get a true understanding of what's being lost.
No.
Okay.
And there is one thing about Benin, for example, on the western coast of Africa. If I'm getting this story right, there were a load of manuscripts in some kind of establishment, and when people were starting to hear, look, we're going to be overrun by the Westerners, they actually hid them all. So when you get circumstances like that, local people are aware that they can do something to keep their history. But if we look at the situation associated with the Zulu and the British, the Zulu actually trusted the British to do the right thing, and they kept trusting the British to do the right thing. But the Zulu broke eventually, and they'd had enough. So it was that trust of the Westerner that was not helpful in that lots of these artifacts do go missing, because when, for example, the British Army went into Addis Ababa, when they invaded Ethiopia, they nicked a lot of stuff from Ethiopia themselves, when Ethiopia did still claim to be an independent country still. So all these things are going out of Africa, and there's this idea that they're in a British museum and they're in there for safekeepings and so on. And that's another debate altogether, which is probably best not to go into.
Okay.
Right, so that was quite a big. So what we're going to do is, I'm going to allow Anne to stay on the screen, but I don't want to interrupt him. So what we're going to do, we are going to dive into Mapungubwe, and Mapungubwe. It's interesting that I've actually done Great Zimbabwe, the later site, after I've done Mapungubwe, and the dates basically range hereabouts. So if we look at, I'm basing this on sort of lots of bits and pieces. So the kingdoms around Mapungubwe, if we look about 800 to roughly about 1250 years CE, that's what we're talking about Mapungubwe. And then when we're looking at the likes of Great Zimbabwe, we're talking about from about the 1100s to this is a precise date again, 1450. So there's a bit of overlap, and then then they're moving again to the north of Zimbabwe again, and then you're looking at the other kingdoms being established, and there's not just one, and they're coming on from about being recorded if we move that date a little bit from about 1400 to about the 1650s. So this is what we're looking at. So in other words, there's a gradual movement of people from the south to the north, and at stages, you know, there's an abandonment period. So that's really what we're talking about. So if we go on to my images, this is a little bit like the previous bit of the lecture, but I want to get into this image. And that's a Zimbabwean face on the right, and so right it should be. And that is a wonderful, the wonderful golden rhinoceros. So the one key thing about this image is that the Zimbabwean is looking at that rhinoceros knowing that that's his heritage. Now, this would be a completely different picture if the West still kept saying, and the Zimbabwean thought that that rhinoceros is not part of his heritage. He wouldn't be looking the same as that rhinoceros. He's looking and thinking, well, right, that is my history. As we would think when we would look at the Bayer Tapestry, that is our history. And then when we would look at the Americans with their Charter of Independence, that is their history. But what we see, there's a connection between the two, and it's that connection is that guy is actually connecting with his real past, not an invented past. This is the point. There's that interlink, and that is why that image is very important. And then when we go on to his own history, and we look at Mapungubwe, the earlier of the two sites, what we say is this plateau. And this is a rather interesting plateau. In my earlier lecture, I'm sure my notes got this wrong, but that is in excess of well over 100 meters across. It's quite a large looking plateau. So wherever I got my notes, this area here is probably about the size of 2 or 3 football pitches, that plateau area. And in the forefront, you've got an area of about 12 acres of occupied area. Now, the plateau itself is where the stone ruins are coming from, which were being excavated in the 1930s, such as these structures. Now, what they're using to build with at Mapungubwe is the sandstone, not the other materials that they're building with at Great Zimbabwe, which are giving them greater blocks, because they're unable to build the great size of the structures at Great Zimbabwe, but by the time they get to the Great Zimbabwe and the building material they do have, they are able to refine what they're actually constructing. And if we go on again, there is our golden rhinoceros. So what I'd like to do, I've got a nice article that I'm going to read out to you now, as I'm looking on my other computer. So Mapungubwe itself, it's located in the north of South Africa. We've already established that, north of the country of South Africa. It's a kingdom that flourished. Both words, all these kingdoms are flourishing, right? Those are the words we're going to use. Mapungubwe is not stone houses, it's stone monuments. Mapungubwe, stone monuments, in the plural rather than the singular. So there's lots of these structures on top of that plateau. As with Great Zimbabwe, there are lots of other stone structures and established areas where these people are. Very much like Great Zimbabwe, it's the copper and the ivory, permitting the sense of trade with the gold and expanding the trade to other areas, i.e. other areas in the east, i.e. China and India and elsewhere. The Mapungubwe Peninsula, that rock that we've just seen. So if we want to actually go back so we can sort of, the rock that we're actually seeing in front of us. I say that in a very respectful way, as you would talk about Ayers Rock. So that rock that we're seeing there, we don't have contemporary records, so the history is actually incomplete. But are they seeing a landscape associated with control, or is it an open confederation? How are they organizing things? But it goes back to the original principle of Great Zimbabwe, where there's there's not really extent of warfare. Obviously there's going to be fighting, of course there is, but into the aspect that we think about Great Zimbabwe having the manpower to build these things, obviously the idea of warfare is absent for large periods of their history. And also, if you're going to destroy something like Great Zimbabwe and the buildings at Mapungubwe, you're going to see damage associated with them, which we're not seeing. So if we read out this little statement here, the king and his court dwelt in a stone enclosure composed of stone walls and housing built on the highest level of the community's territory. So in other words, building on this plateau, dominating the landscape, is you're a king to be a leader. And this is where the kings are going to be buried as well. Do we really understand it as much as I'm stating? I don't think we do, because we've got that breach in understanding. It's a shame that we interfered with these people's understanding of their past, because if we hadn't, maybe we'd understand a lot more. So the kingdom of Mapungubwe, formed by Bantu speaking people, obviously, and these are sort of pastoralists, very much involved into agriculture, herding and growing cowpeas and sorghum, for example. A plentiful and extensive lifestyle. And what we do see is cotton cultivation as well. Yeah, we got cotton cultivation, weaving as well. We got evidence of spindle wheels being excavated at these sites. Again, this is all about understanding and reliance and working with the environment to actually create what we've got. And that is probably key to what we're saying. We're not talking about exhausting the landscape. So what I'd like to do now is I'd actually like to share this article that I've got in front of me, because there's something key to this article. So if we do a bit of a new share, and okay, Mapungubwe. That's not Mapungubwe. Yes, it is. So there we go. This is what I'd like to show you. And what we're going to do, I'm going to click on here and we're going to make this bigger. Now, this is rather important. So as we're looking at this plan, this represents lots of these kingdoms in the south, and obviously look at some of the ones in the north. So the chief itself, Mapungubwe, if we really associate it with trade, it's with cattle. That's what gives the power to the king. And there's talk here of the king being the rainmaker. That's another lecture altogether. Sort of, you've got power over the rain, you've got power over decision, that type of level. So what we've got this plateau that is 30 meters over the landscape. When you compare this with something like Great Zimbabwe and the walls, 12, 13, 14, 15 meters in height, you can get an idea of commanding the landscape with a structure. Like you've got a natural structure, you're sort of pins in together, sort of understanding. The whole complex was originally surrounded by a wooden palisade, as indicated by post holes. But naturally, what was that palisade? Was it truly a demonstration of defense, or truly a demonstration of power? So we've got the Matapa state there. Now, this is what I've been saying from day one. I said that you've got the San people in the south, Sanat and all that type of culture, moving up into the people of Mapungubwe. Slightly different dates, but I think what the dates are saying, the evidence of Mapungubwe as a real locality takes us into the 1200s, being founded about 800 years AD. Great Zimbabwe again, Great Zimbabwe, the buildings there, the real works beginning about the 1300s, obviously being established about the 1100s, abandoning 1450, which is key. And then, it's a bit fine. 1450, Great Zimbabwe is abandoned. The Matapa state established a few miles north in 1450. Let's just give a little bit of leeway there. So what you've got a movement of these peoples for various different reasons. But it's probably more to do with trade and actually status. Last week I mentioned, I think it was last week, no, it was the week before, I mentioned about the word water. I mentioned about the Arabians having to move their economy to water rather from oil. They can do that in situ, but if it meant that the Arabians were having to move north because it would make them wealthy to get to the water, then that's the sort of analogy we're talking about. Just a few things here. The Kingdom of Congo, spelt with a K and not a C, obviously giving way then to the likes of the Belgians taking over the kingdom. Swahili Coast people, just a few quick things. I do believe that there was a program on Monday that looked at the Kingdom of Kush on the Beeb, I think it was. Now that's obviously occupying at the same time as ancient Egypt, the Black Pharaohs, but we don't actually hear anything about this kingdom. We hear about the Kingdom of Aksum and Abyssinia, but there's lots of other kingdoms as well.
Yeah.
So if we go into the heart of the country, the Borneo Empire, look at that date, 1893 comes to an end due to outsiders as well. So lots of these kingdoms are still there, but they're being conquered by the Western world. And then you've got the Benin as well, from the 11 all the way into the 1800s. How dare us destroy their rich civilization, but we did. Various other things like the Nalt culture on the Ghanaian Empire and the Mali Empire and so on the Western coast. All of these are all relevant. These have got their own time signs in a history, and these must be recognized for what we're looking at. So just a few notes in what we're seeing in front of us here. And what we've got is the rest of the community lived in the mud and thatched housing spread below the hill. Just an area of, it's saying, if we want to round that up to 13 acres with the plateau, a couple of acres itself. So 15 acres, probably no more in total. And if you compare this with the 200 acres at Great Zimbabwe, it makes this quite a small site. But these people would naturally evolve into where they're going with Great Zimbabwe. It's talking about structure and how things develop. Obviously, the lower people on the lower level, the richer people on the higher level. Again, you can get an analogy with Great Zimbabwe with the structure of the walls. Basically, other richer people who are going to compete with the leaders themselves would live slightly a little bit away. So interesting. That's actually a lot clearer, that Mapungubwe gold rhinoceros, and you can see where all the little dots are in there to sort of pin it onto the wood. It's saying about the plateau itself being within an area of an upper region. Closer to the Limpopo River and closer to rivers than the Great Zimbabwe culture, but these people knew to live high up. And it's not an idea to dominate the landscape. Your people are there as well. It's a little bit away from the water, but I think it's more that they understood the topography of the landscape rather than we do. In the West, we're bloody lazy. We build our cities alongside floodplains, and we are at wonder why our cities get flooded. Their cities didn't get flooded, and they were not available to be harassed by the tsetse fly, for example. So again, I'm going to keep this on there. Trade. The Mapungubwe Plateau has a very high number of, so back up on the rock itself. So what I'm going to do, I want us to get back up on the rock. So I'm going to, where are we now? Well, we've got a few bits and pieces to go, but what I'm going to do is actually get you back to the images that you were looking at, and I can actually read from my notes to actually give context here. So that's the plateau itself that they're describing, and the ruins actually on top of the plateau, such as these types of ruins. And if we go to my notes over here, it's talking about not only were the rich and well-to-do living on this plateau with these wonderful stone buildings, stone for the rich, the other timber and earth for the poor, or maybe that's the wrong analogy. However, when we look at Great Zimbabwe, everyone's rich because they got stone walls, so it's great. It's almost as if there's so much wealth that the wealth can be shared. If you see something similar with Minoan and Etruscan civilization, where you're at the top of civilization, which the Great Zimbabwe is at the top of civilization, a great civilization in Africa. and it's so insulting to say that there's any influence from the West. So it's a great civilization. But at this stage, when we look at Mapungubwe, slightly before Great Zimbabwe, all the upper class stuff is going on the plateau. And what they've done, they found the remains of ivory, various remains of carnivores. So obviously we've got animal hides, rich animal hides being harvested, and elephant tusks accumulating there as well. At the site itself, on top of the plateau excavated in 1937, we've got evidence of glass beads from India, tick box trade, faraway trade, fragments of Chinese pottery, Caledon pottery from China. So that's coming in by trade. In turn, they're expanding their trade in regards to skins, ivory, the gold, and the copper itself. Likewise coming in, various goods from India, silks and so on from Arabia. This is the height of civilization, but it's got further to go when we go to Great Zimbabwe. So if we want to look at this, what we need to do is say as follows. Where we look at, say, for example, water is key to the Nabatean civilization, trade and the movement of trade is key to the people, these three movements of civilizations along the south and eastern coast of Africa. Trade is, you could say trade is important to all civilizations, but I would disagree. There's different ways of looking at trade, and trade actually per se for the survival of your civilization, rather than water when you look at the Nabateans, or conquest when you look at the Romans, is key to where they are in the world. So when the trade routes change, they move. That is key. If you want to compare this to the Roman Empire, the Romans kept fighting. So there you go. When you look at the archaeological evidence, what we're seeing is there are different, in the pottery itself, the excavated pottery, we're finding the upper class pottery, you know, the wonderful beakers, the bowls, and all the rest of it. The decorated pottery is associated, and the ceramics are associated with those on the plateau at this stage. And obviously little figurines of cattle, sheep and goats and so on. All these are associated with what we're finding on the plateau, and other goods associated with the other people on the lower levels. Now, what I'd like to do is mention a particular type of decoration only found at one of the site, Great Zimbabwe, was to beat gold into small rectangular sheets. So what we need to do is go back to my little article. So new share and Mumby Bumby, there we go. So what we've got at the bottom of the screen is this. And then if we go back to the rhinoceros, give you an idea what we're talking about further up there. So what we're talking about is golden nuggets, beating them out into little sheets, which were then decorated with geometric patterns made by incision and used to cover wooden objects. Obviously, the wooden objects long since gone, but obviously they're covering these wooden objects that have been carved, and those little holes on the rhinoceros are actually, and what they would do, they would use little tacks to tack the gold onto the wooden base, either copper tacks or golden tacks. Golden tacks, golden nails. Never the like of it, folks. How can you think of golden nails? One such covered object, if we sort of go down to the bottom of the screen, there you go. One such is that sort of scepter-like thing there. And what we can think of is loads of little beads and so on. And we've got that rhinoceros that I've mentioned. They found hundreds of fragments of bangles and thousands of golden beads all on that plateau. And some of it is associated with burial and so on and so on. Are you still there, folks?
Yes.
I had something flash up on my screen. It was a weird video. So these are the first known indicators that gold had an intrinsic value of its own in southern Africa, as opposed to just a commodity currency. So what we're saying, even though you could see it as a commodity, a currency, its intrinsic value in burial might overrule the value in regards to currency. So as we start to get down to the end of this article and just a few images left, the kingdom of Mapungubwe was in decline by the time the way you look at Great Zimbabwe itself. It says here that it may have been brought to a crisis point due to droughts. I dismiss that. I think it's more to do with trade routes may also have shifted northwards and local resources run out. So they just upped and left to Great Zimbabwe itself. This being said, at the bottom of this article, and then we'll show you some images and we'll finish. When Europeans discovered the ruins of Mapungubwe in the 1800s, just as with those at Great Zimbabwe, they could not believe such impressive structures were built by Black Africans. Theories abounded to somehow explain their presence and confirm racist European beliefs, such as attributing them to the ancient Egyptians or Phoenicians. Archaeology, however, has won on this one. Has since proved both sites, Great Zimbabwe and Mapungubwe, as being built by indigenous people in the medieval period, the great descendants of the Shona and the great descendants of all peoples in Africa. And it's something to be very, very proud of, that we're actually getting to something that's meaningful for the people of Africa. So just this bit of gold, a stone structure that leads on to our gold rhinoceros, leading on to our, as we call it, a Ganu, a wildebeest. Looks quite sad, really.
Yeah,
Plodding along. That's basically a wildebeest there. And that's the gold. So you've got a golden bowl, which would have actually been mounted around a wooden bowl, so it wouldn't have leaked. So that's like a scepter type object. And look at, that's a chain. Every little bit of gold there, every single link, thousands in that one chain. And you start to think, well, if Cecil Rhodes had really got to this site, lots of this would have been gone. It's likely that lots of the site had been looted anyway, but the archaeologists were able to find so much anyway. And finally, what they're doing there is they're actually trying to reconstruct some of the archaeology associated with Mapungubwe. These are big, fat squatter towers with shorter walls than the ones at Great Zimbabwe. This is at Mapungubwe. You can see the difference in build here. They're using smaller stones, which would placate smaller height than the tall vaulting buildings that you see with Great Zimbabwe itself. Just an artist's impression on top of the plateau. These houses in the sort of hinterland below, maybe a little bit more of a lowly sort of warrior king down here that was waiting for his time to be king. Maybe, maybe not. Now you can imagine the archaeologists excavating in 1937. They say, "Oh, look," to the British administration. They're going to say, "Oh, look what we found," and the British administration say, "That's been built by the Portuguese." No, it's not. Built by the Portuguese. Yeah, but this is the evidence. It's built by Portuguese. So in other words, it's only until the 1900s, after apartheid and all the rest of it, that people are actually being told the truth. This is built by native Africans. This is built by the this is built by the ancestors of the Shona people, Bantu speaking peoples of the area. And finally, displaying the past is somewhere where they're going down in connection with Mapungubwe and Great Zimbabwe. And may I say that, you know, Great Zimbabwe is very much prized. No matter, I hear all the criticism about the Zimbabweans, and what I do see is a people that are trying to find their roots and their identity, and that's got to be respected. And that's where I want to leave it. So well done, Africa. Keep telling us more about this wonderful archaeology that you've got. Hopefully more civilizations, and be proud with what you've got. What I'd like to ask is, there any questions from you, Anne?
I just wondered, would that be because it's gold? They're working in gold. I'm kind of getting to the point. Is it the Bronze Age? Because
No, they've got iron tools there.
Mari was working on in Pilansberg,
Mapungubwe.
South Africa, and she said that was the Iron Age
Yes, it was.
The Iron Age was around 18. It was in the 18th century, she said. But I just thought that, I suppose there's a,
No. The evidence from Great Zimbabwe is that this is an Iron Age for these people.
right.
But that's really derogatory. Iron Age
I
says
know
that they
it's
were
derogatory,
prehistoric.
yeah.
Iron Age says they're prehistoric. They're not prehistoric. There are people using iron like we were using iron in the West. They're trading. They're within the world. That's the point. This isn't a backwards part of the world. They're within the world. They're within the world in the 1300s, whilst we're in the world. They're within the world when they're moving and trading with the on the Swahili coast as well, and they're alongside the world, and it cannot be dismissed. That it cannot be interrupted. Give them all the respect where they deserve to have.
I didn't want to be derogatory because I was just sort of
It's difficult to do this without
understand where they were obviously, you know, being influenced by trade. Yeah, they've obviously been influenced by trade and other, because I'm thinking of like Constantinople is by, no, not Constantinople, it's not by Africa, is it?
Oh no, right. Okay then,
Right,
Anne.
I'm going now.
Thank
Sorry,
you. You were doing so well then. You were doing so well. Right, Henri.
Just a quick one. Written records from this era. Anything of substantial nature or none at all?
What the logic that the logic that people have looking at the Portuguese stuff is because the Portuguese were first to refer to these cities. They must have created them. Because there's no, these people ain't writing things down in the usual sense. But because it's an oral history, that's their written history.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. So is it actually an oral history rather than a written history?
It's an oral history, yes.
Right.
It's an oral history. And then Pat, your last say, and then that's my teaching done for this week, and then it starts up tomorrow. Right, go for it.
Right. I just have heard something about these kingdoms, but I've never seen it so clearly explained in pictures and all. So very interesting. Thank you very much.
No, it's a pleasure. It's next week we're going to do the archaeology of the collapse of Roman Britain, which is not as easy as it sounds, and this isn't easy, this one, but we've explored another area that weirdly enough I never set out to do any of these in a certain order, and if you look, there's links between every single one. So right, if there's anyone want to say anything else, yeah, anybody?
Well, thank you very much, Carl. That was very interesting.
Yep, thank you.
My pleasure. So what I'm going to do, if there's nothing else anyone wants to say, Pat, I will hopefully see you on Saturday. You don't join us Saturday, do you?
No.
Right. Okay. I will see you. It'll be a long time away, Pat. Oh yeah, I'm at 5 o'clock on YouTube tomorrow.
Okay.
5 o'clock YouTube. Tomorrow, and Henri, I'll see you next week, and I'll see you in the frying pan on Wednesday. And other than that, if there's no other questions, I really appreciate that, guys. So this is an early end today, 20 minutes earlier. So Henry, Pat, and Anne, thanks for joining us, and I will see you all next week. Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope you're feeling better soon. I hope you get over this quick, Pat.
Yeah, go on, Pat. Get yourself outside, naked. Stand outside with a mint in your mouth, and it'll get rid of it.
Okay, will do. So long.
Take care, Pat. Bye.
Bye, Pat.
Bye.
Bye,
Bye,
Anne.
Bye, Anne. Bye, Henri. Oh, you're still there, Henri?
Yeah, I was going to wait until you stop recording.
All right, then what I'm going to do, I'm going to see you, Anne. Hang on.
Bye. Bye.
And I'm going to stop recording on 3,